My name is Eric. I live here in San Francisco with my wife Nikki and our beautiful son Hugo. And our daughter Lola was stillborn on Christmas Eve 2008.
I called the nurse's station because I felt some movement that wasn't exactly normal. It was sort of flowy instead of kicky. And we called the nurse's station and she said, "Oh, don't worry, it's Christmas Eve. Moms always feel excited and feel nervous."
And then the next morning we woke up and Nikki said, "I'm really nervous. She's not moving. I've never felt her not move before." So we went to the hospital.
And there was no heartbeat.
She had died in the night.
It turns out that she had an umbilical cord accident. And apparently in the last 2 weeks, that's the last thing that can happen.
That was the last day of my normal life. That was a different person back then, and it's changed us both profoundly.
Then I had to give birth, and that was very difficult.
We were so devastated and surprised. We didn't know what to do, and it just never had occurred to us that anything like this could happen to us. Babies don't die.
I made the arrangements to give birth to Sean because I felt that was my role. There's not much I could do. I felt very helpless.
Probably the hardest thing you'd have to go through is giving birth to a baby that's not going to cry.
Knowing that I was going through all of that to deliver a baby who was already dead was heartbreaking.
I didn't want to sweep it under the rug. I didn't want to say, okay, this is a chance event and it's a memory and we'll continue. I really wanted to make sure that his life was celebrated. So obviously when he was born, we spent some time with him.
I was trying to protect Nikki and trying to help her. And we weren't sure whether we could hold the baby. Luckily, the doctors and nurses had enough presence of mind to suggest that we spend at least a little time with her.
I had no doubts that I wanted to see him and meet him and hold him, which felt like 5 minutes to me. Didn't feel very long. Flava says it was more than like a half an hour, but to me it felt very short.
No one discussed with us whether it made sense for us to spend more or less time with him, or to take pictures with him.
Certainly everything at that point in life I questioned, right? I felt like I didn't want it to be a sideshow as well, right? I wanted to really make sure that even though he passed, he's passing with dignity, and that we would preserve his memory for us in a very positive way. So our mothers were there. We said our goodbyes and we went out and set up all the arrangements for his funeral.
After all of this happened, we went into the grieving phase. It's a very lonely process, and we were not really offered the level of support that I think one might expect.
We saw a social worker really briefly in the hospital, and that was totally unsatisfying. I feel like there's so much to say about how parents need to be supported in the hospital and in their lives afterwards.
I remember walking down the street and feeling as if I had fallen through a wormhole and I was in some other reality.
I knew that I was grieving differently than my husband. I was severely depressed and I was crying all the time.
Grief often manifests itself differently between men and women. My personal experience is I experienced a lot more anger than Nikki did.
It was less anger for me, but more of the need to protect my family and make sure everyone was okay. My daughters were very young. They were 3 and 5 at the time.
I was just so unprepared for what would happen. The milk still comes in. My body thought that I gave birth, and I had to bind my breasts so that the milk would know to stop.
I'll see a little girl walking down the street and sometimes I'll just break into tears, and that's just me now.
Looking back, immediately I wanted to put the blame on myself. I know that she went through her feelings, her guilt in her own way. But that's probably what I really did to kind of handle it.
I definitely felt guilty, and especially because the comments that my doctor made were all about don't exercise, don't lift anything heavy. That implied that it was my exercising, it was my lifting heavy things.
I became completely unable to deal with really basic kind of anticipations and fears. Going back to work was just...
And facing people was really hard for me, facing people for the first time, like my friends and people at work. People expected you to be back and normal, and you're not.
No one knew what to say. No one knew what to do. I was very good about saying, don't give me any advice. Just sitting with me quietly. That was much more comforting to me than, I know it's hard, but in a couple of days you'll feel better. Like, I hated that.
There were people that we could talk to really easily about it, and we became even closer with those people. And then there were people for whom it was not something that they could engage with, and we're not friends with them anymore. Our whole life was changing, and that also meant that our social landscape was going to change.
When you go over an experience like this, you hope that the people who are close to you will be the ones who will be able to offer their help, but that isn't necessarily what will happen. We formed new friendships, we strengthened some friendships. And through this process also, I think what ends up happening is that there are some people who end up sort of distancing themselves from you because sometimes people don't know what to say, they're afraid to talk to you. And then after a while, naturally, people just kind of shy away from reaching out.
Stillbirth is not something that anybody talks about. I never even knew that this happened. Once we started talking about it, a lot of people said, oh yeah, something like that happened in my family too. You know, people that we had known for years.
It's a very taboo subject. So I really did feel like nobody else has ever gone through this, and I'm the only one.
Out of every 160 pregnancies, one child is lost after the 20th week of pregnancy. So it does happen more often than a lot of people realize.
Talking about it was a way of acknowledging that it had happened to us, and also acknowledging, I think, the kind of deeper humanity of it, that it's something that happens quite a bit.
One of the things that they did for me before I left the hospital was they gave me a hand brochure, and it helped to have the knowledge that I was not alone.
They did give us, pamphlets and information that would help us after giving birth, and that's how we discovered HAND was seeing the pamphlet, but also hearing from the doctors or nurses.
I also had a close friend at work whose wife was a nurse, and by coincidence, he emailed me as soon as we let everyone know what happened, and he mentioned HAND. So those are two things that really stuck in my head, that I should see what this is about.
We talked to the director, who I'm forever grateful to, and she just was there to listen and absorb. And we started going to HAND meetings. That was the thing that was the only place that we felt like we could really talk about what was going on.
To me, that was really helpful to kind of just be able to see that I wasn't crazy, that I was being unreasonable, So I think it was really nice just to kind of see the people having similar thoughts.
People have a better sense of what it's like to go through this experience. And so you don't have to explain necessarily how hard it is. You don't have to explain that even though your child's life was short, that you had built such a strong connection with them.
They weren't going to judge you. I think that's one thing. And not that we were afraid of being judged, but just hearing other people encouraged me to want to express it more. And the more I got to express it, the more I realized that I could deal with it.
The guilt is heavy, and I haven't yet met a parent who came to HAND who didn't feel it. So I was so sure that I had done this. And being there with other women who have said, I was doing absolutely nothing. I was lying down, through my entire pregnancy and still had that same separation.
I had to almost portray something, a stronger person when we were together as a family. But at some point I realized that I definitely had to deal with understanding the situation holistically, not creating scenarios in my head, being truthful about what happened.
I thought that just what I kept in my memory was enough, and that I was going to honor him by always remembering him. But I think there are times when it's nice to have something like a picture that you can just hold and look at.
I regret that I don't have my own pictures of her. Doctors were, and the nurses took photographs of her, and so we have a few photographs.
My therapist told me to do these sort of intensive grieving moments. So I would take out Lola's box that we have all of her things in, her little sweater that I bought for her to come home in, her blanket, pictures, and I would just really dive into it and have my own grieving moment so that it didn't come out of nowhere. Then I could put it away when I was done, and I felt so much better the rest of the day. It wasn't overtaking my life anymore. I was in charge of it.
I didn't want to forget the memory right away. And I still hold it with me today. And it's hard. I know my kids and Penny knows that there are times it just overwhelms me. But I've accepted it as a part of who I am.
I was able to mark my progress in very little baby steps. Like, okay, I'm not crying all the time right now. Now I'm only crying when I'm at home. And now I'm only crying in the shower.
And eventually you develop the habit of coming out of your grief, and then that becomes a sort of new normal for you. But that's what happened to me. I got used to the fact that I could pick myself off the ground after I'd been crying.
We feel that the best way for us to honor his life and his existence is to use his memory as something positive that always reminds us to be better people.
I try not to focus too much on what I would have had. I think that's a sad rabbit hole to go down. But I really try and just think about my life now.
I probably, in many ways, it's made me more compassionate, more thoughtful, more introspective towards, my friends and family.
I was only able to give birth to a healthy child once I forgave myself.
I feel very lucky. No, it wasn't luck. It was a lot of hard work to have a second baby. It took the most courage I've ever had to conjure up.